I'm Mike Scantlebury. I'm a writer. I write songs, I write books, I make films, I write plays. And in November 2016, I wrote this book, Genocide, by Mike Scantlebury. So, like I say, that was 2016. A lot's changed since then, but some things haven't. So, I think I'd make this video to answer some recent questions, things that I find very concerning. For instance, there's been a lot of discussion online about what is a woman. And a lot of people seem to have real trouble with this. I don't know why. Maybe what we ought to do is ask the computers, because artificial intelligence has been given this kind of job. I was reading about it just recently, that one form of AI has been fed pictures of cats, pussycats, and the idea is that the AI is going to work out on its own, without being told, what is it about cats that makes them a cat. So they've been given hundreds, possibly thousands of pictures of cats, some small cats, some large cats, some black and white cats, some ginger cats, some grey cats, cats with tails or without tails, and so on. And each of those pictures that is a cat has been labelled cat. But also the AI has been given pictures of other furry creatures, such as dogs, such as stoats, such as rats, and these pictures have been clearly marked not cat. But it's up to the AI to spot what are the characteristics that all cats have that would enable you to say they were cats and dismiss other things out of that. And what the computer programmers are saying is, what they're doing is building a category. So there is a category of cats. There's an enclosure in which all cats would fit, whereas there's other things. We're talking about domestic cats, of course. So leopards, lions, tigers, no, they're not in that category. Domestic cats. And there are all kinds of colours and looks and so on. But the AI is gradually being able to make that decision about whether, if you feed it a new picture and you say this is a cat, and then, or if you say it's a cat, the AI might agree with you. That's right. Or if it's just blank, the AI will make a good stab at saying whether or not the computer thinks it's a cat. Now, the reason that seems to me that's possible is because that's exactly what human beings do. From a very early age, we are given information and we build up categories about everything, about cars, boats, sailing ships, and also male and female. I remember being maybe 9 or 10, and my mother shooed me out into the back garden and said, go away and play. And I said, well, who am I going to play with? And she said, well, next door in that direction, there's a girl about your age. Maybe you could invite her in to play. And on the other side, there's a young man about your age. Get him to play. He's got an older brother. He might not want to play with you. But then a couple of doors up from that, we could see there was a little chap in the garden, and he was playing on his own. Maybe he'd like to come down and play with you. So right away, my mother was able to tell me that next door there's a young child, and they were a girl. And the other way, there was a young child, and they were a boy. And then there was this other boy. And then the girl had a mother, and she was female, and so was my mother. I was a boy. She was my mother. And next door, around 6 o'clock at night, a man would come in, and he was the husband and father, and he was male. And so I'm not saying that that's normal. I mean, they were lucky. They had this girl and her sister had a mother and a father, so they had a whole family. But I was able to build up from the people I met in the locality this category in my head, which said Some people are male, some people are female. And not only that, I was there at junior school, and it was a very old building. And one of the strange things about it was that the toilets were actually outside the main building across the playground. You had to run across the playground to get to the toilet. Sometimes you were running very fast to get there quickly. And they were quite clearly divided up. One side was boys and one side was girls. So when I went to junior school, I must have somehow picked up the fact that of all the young children around me, uh, this was a boy, this over here was not boy, this was a girl, and that person was not girl, that was a boy, and that person was girl. Now, generally speaking, then, in my head, I built up some pictures which gave me a good idea of what male and female might be like, just like AI might do. However, there was always exceptions, always, because as I grew up, I might think that girls had long hair, for instance, and boys had short hair, which was generally true in the 1960s. But what happened then? The hippies came along, they grew their hair down to their shoulders. But of course, they did that because that wasn't average, that wasn't general. They did that just to make a fuss and be different. And then some women had short hair, but because of other attributes, you could tell they were women. So it wasn't that one thing. It's not one thing. In these discussions online, people keep saying, well, what's the one thing? Tell us one thing that distinguishes men from women. Crazy. What a crazy thing to say. That's not how the human brain works. What we do is gather into our little list of things that form a category, just like we would if we were trying to define what is a motor car and what is not a motor car. We would collect pictures and we could see some had 4 wheels, some had 3 wheels, some had 6 wheels, and we would work out in our brain what were the common characteristics and then make a good guess. Sometimes we'd be wrong, just like now. We can guess if we see somebody walking up the steps towards us as we come out of the door of an office block. We might decide to open that door if we were old fashioned. We might decide to open the door for them if it was a woman, and we might stand there and let them come in. If it's a man, we might just open the door and then hand it to them as we went out, because those are the old fashioned rules of what you do for men and women. But in order to do that, in order to have those kind of 1950s manners, you have to be able to say that person over there is a woman, or very, very probably, even though in the 1960s the men grew their hair. In the 1920s, after the First World War, women started wearing slacks. Before then, they didn't wear trousers. There was a very, very famous woman in Britain before the First World War. She was a singer who went around the music halls, and she sang songs like Burlington Bertie, and her name was Vera something, and she wore a dinner jacket and tails and a white tie and a top hat. Now, generally speaking, in those days, the people who wore top hats were the men. But obviously, that didn't mean women couldn't wear top hats. It meant that they didn't. And what we're told is that gender, this man-woman split, is organized by society. It's imposed by society. Well, I think that's not true. I think what happens is most people accept that there are various items about the way people dress, whether or not they wear makeup. Don't forget, in the 1970s, men pop singers started wearing makeup. But again, it was to shock. It was to amaze people. It's to make themselves different. Generally speaking, men didn't wear makeup. And that's why it was different and why they were popular. Just as now, if there wasn't a difference between men and women, then you couldn't have drag acts. Because drag is clearly where what you're looking at is a man dressed up as an over-the-top woman. Sure, they've got long hair, but it's huge and goes everywhere. It's an exaggeration. Sure, they wear makeup, but it's huge. It's got all kinds of colours on it. They wear frocks and dresses, but it's all exaggerated. If men and women were the same and wearing dresses wasn't a thing that separated them, then you couldn't have drag. Because that person, they're wearing a dress, they're wearing makeup, they've got big piles of hair on their head. So what are they, a man or a woman? We don't know. That's a really, really silly thing to say. Generally speaking, and that means there's always an exception, but generally speaking, because from the time of growing up, we are told that this person we meet is a man, this person we meet is a woman. We put them in our category and then we use that to recognize that kind of person in the future. So that's my answer. It's not about hormones. It's not about chromosomes. This person has got an XX, this person's got an XY, this person's got an XXY. Generally speaking, generally, in the normal sort of conversations that we have, we don't say to somebody, pleased to meet you, you appear to me to be a man, but could I just check, what are your chromosomes? Yeah, I just like to know. Just tell me. Are you an XY? Are you? Just tell me. We don't do that. And generally speaking, we don't ask people to drop their trousers so that they can check what they've got in their shorts. That isn't the way that generally speaking we recognise whether they're a man or a woman. So it's very sad really that people who decide to transition from one sex to the other are focused on the idea that they've got to go and see a doctor in a hospital and have an operation, when most of the time everybody they meet in general life isn't going to ask them what they've got in their shorts, because that isn't the way that we make up a decision about whether or not they're male or female. So I saw Caitlyn Jenner online just recently, and they were having a lively discussion with people about trans people, about men and women and people who trans, which is fine with me. I think I know what's a man and what's a woman. I've got my categories sorted out. But if somebody wants to move from one to the other, then that's their business. And if they want to be addressed as she, that's fine, I can do that. If they want to change their name, fine, I can adjust to that. People can call themselves whatever they like. However, having said that, what I noticed is that Caitlyn Jenner had done the visible things, so that she'd grown her hair, she was wearing makeup, she was wearing a dress, she had the shape of a woman, and that all seemed to match. I don't know whether she's finished having the operation yet, but she certainly, according to Wikipedia, had her name down for having a medical transition. Right, I understand that. That's very good. What I couldn't understand was during that debate, she suddenly got very angry, very abruptly, and said to this chap, hey, if you say things like that to me, we're going to have to take that outside. She got threatening. She was threatening violent behaviour. And I was thinking, hang on, generally speaking, when you think about the categories of men and women, that's not the behaviour of the average woman. Generally speaking, there might be some violent and aggressive women around, and certainly some women do boxing these days, and wrestling and cage fighting, and that stretches the boundaries, and good for them. They want to find what they're interested in, get some success in life, good on them. But what I found it strange was that here was a person who apparently had transitioned. Once they were a man and now they're a woman. It was as though they brought with them from the other side the kind of behaviour that might be accepted in the male camp, but really stood out as being exceptional. That kind of threatening behaviour, that kind of bullying, that kind of putting forward physical response because you weren't winning the argument, you were going to punch somebody. Generally speaking, that's not what we expect women to do. Now, that might be culturally conditioned, and there might be women out there who want to punch people all the time. But generally speaking, we judge people not just by the clothes they wear and what their haircut looks like. We also judge people by their behavior. And thank goodness in our culture there's a group of people who are a lot more reasoned, and don't go around punching people regularly. There's exceptions, I accept that. But when we talk about, for instance, domestic abuse, the majority of people that get abused are women, and the majority of people who do the abusing are men. Sometimes it's the other way around. I completely acknowledge that. But it's a minority, a very, very small minority. So this person that we're talking about, who used to be a man, obviously hasn't made the whole transition, because they brought with them what is actually unacceptable behavior in any civilized society, in any debate, in any forum, and somehow, because they're a trans woman, they seem to think it's all right. They seem to think that's okay, that we could say, oh, well, Caitlin, we can see you're annoyed, and therefore, if you want to take that guy outside and have a fight with him, that's perfectly acceptable. Now, I'm saying that it doesn't matter. At the moment, she is a woman. Before that, she was a man. In either case, punching people during debates is a sign of unacceptable machismo and shouldn't be allowed. Certainly, should just not be allowed. But my final point is that what we expect of all people, male or female, is, generally speaking, it really helps if they're consistent. If what they say today is the same as what they said yesterday, and if what they say they believe is the same. And it's really confusing that this person I'm talking about is coming forward as, firstly, a supporter of the Republican Party. Well, isn't it the Republicans that are trying to get rid of LGBT rights in America, state by state? Therefore, how can anybody who fits into one of those categories support the Republican Party? I don't understand that. Secondly, apparently, the person I'm talking about has said that they think it's obvious that boys who decide that they want to be girls should not be allowed to take part in girls' sports. Now, that's very confusing, because here we're talking about a person who used to be a male athlete and won an Olympic gold, did very well in their sport, and then has become a woman, but says that people who follow that track shouldn't be allowed to do what women do. Where do you draw the line there? Surely, if somebody is male and then they move over into this other category, female, then they ought to be allowed and expected to do whatever they do. It's said that in 2016, Donald Trump said that this person we're talking about should be allowed to use any of the bathrooms in the Trump Tower. And it didn't upset him at all. Well, it wouldn't, would it? He didn't own the place. He sold Trump Tower back to the bank that paid for building it. So he didn't really have the power to make that sort of gesture. But anyway, it's very confusing that somebody should say, I used to be in that camp, which was the male camp. I'm now in the female camp. However, I want to make an exception and say that male people who become female shouldn't be allowed to compete in female sports, because there are people out there, I don't know if you've heard of them, but there are people who say that if any man, if any boy, if any male says, I feel like I am now female, then they should be allowed to be female and they should be totally female, which again is confusing, isn't it? Because in that case, there's no such thing as trans. What it means is you can say, well, it was male, but now I'm female. But people don't do that. They say, no, if you're moving into the female category, then you're a trans female. So immediately we've invented a new category. There's male, there's female, and there's people in the female camp who used to be in the male camp, and we're treating them differently. I don't understand that. I'm not sure where I stand on it, but I would like somebody to explain to me why it is that trans women aren't women and can decide how other men who decide to become women should behave when they arrive in the male camp. And we're missing something out here. The way that trans men behave when they're women, shouldn't that be acceptable to women? Because they're the people who are really affected. If somebody says that they're male, and I say, well, yeah, look, male, I'm a male, I can understand that. And then they say, I'm female, well, then they've moved out of my category. I shouldn't have anything to say about it. But the women should have. Why shouldn't they decide who goes in the women's changing rooms? Why isn't it their decision? Why, in a country like ours and a country like the USA, we actually expect male judges to make decisions in court about what trans women are allowed to do and not do. That's a crazy mixed up world. I don't understand it at all. And finally, on a personal note, what do I know? What do I know about XY chromosomes? And what do I know about hormones? What do I know? Well, I'll tell you one thing I do know. 3 years ago, I was diagnosed as somebody with prostate cancer. And the treatment I was given was that I was expected to have an injection every 3 months. And that injection was of female hormones. And that was to keep the cancer at bay. So now, the amount of testosterone I've got in my body is tiny, and getting smaller. And the amount of female hormones in my body is small and getting bigger. So, at some point, maybe I could shave off my beard and move into the other category. Because if we're going to discuss it on the grounds of hormones and chromosomes and DNA, then who knows? I might be able to take the test and pass it. But yes, I would have to shave my beard off, and I would have to start wearing different clothes, and I'd have to start talking differently, wouldn't I? Instead of talking like this, I'd have to talk like this, because that's what people do when they transition. If you look, what you can see is that people start walking differently, they talk differently, they wear different things, and they try to fit in to all those categories that up to that point society has tried to impose on the female category. Society has tried to impose on the female category. So I don't think that going down the road and trying to define women as people who've got certain biological attributes is going to be very helpful, because generally speaking, that isn't an issue. And when it is an issue, it's a tiny proportion of people. And I'm fascinated to learn that maybe I fit into that category. Whatever next?